Welcome everyone. So yes, have an exciting panel lined up. We have Elaine Carsenat, who's produced an amazing business called Uncopied. So we'll be hearing about Elaine, from Elan rather. We've also got Francis Liddell, who's basically a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. And to kick us off, we've got Gustaf Decking, who's founder of the art and tech startup Artifund. So we're going to have a position statement from each of our panelists, and then we'll have an open discussion for the second half. So Gustaf, if you'd like to start, and if you've got a presentation, then please feel free to share your screen.
So thanks for having me, Carl, and for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody, live from Amsterdam, or close to Amsterdam at least. I'm Gustaf, and like Carl already mentioned, I'm currently developing a platform that is creating extra liquidity for the international cultural sector, and at the same time, it should engage in a new digital community of art patrons. And the topic of today, of course, is non-fungible tokens. And we've been researching and iterating and validating the use of non-fungible tokens to get the right fit for the cultural sector and creative sector since 2019. And well, many of you, I think, might have heard of the non-fungible tokens since the beginning of the year, or maybe today for the first time. But it's not something entirely new. There's been many interesting projects that are being investigated and being set up. Francis is doing a lot of research on this, and Elian as well is founding something very interesting. But what we are doing is we help a museum to turn their two most valuable assets, being their collection and their expertise, into revenue-generating digital collectibles. So that's in short what we do, and you can think about very digital twins of the original masterpieces into a limited edition or collaboration with contemporary new media or digital artists, or content created from research that has been done on the collection or as addition or in addition to the collection. So everything collection and expertise based, and we turn those all the content and interesting things from the museum, from the institution, into something that could be bought, sold, and traded on our platform. So that's in short what we do.
Okay, thank you, Gustaf. That's fascinating. So Francis, I think you complement Gustaf's work, so please go next.
Yeah, sure. I've got some slides, so I'll just share my screen. Great. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, we can see it fine.
Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Carl, for the introduction. My name's Francis Liddell. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. And basically, I've been working with the National Museums of Liverpool for the last couple of years on a collaborative PhD project since around sort of September 2018. And we've been looking at the use of non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, within museum practices, and basically thinking about how we can use NFTs to forge kind of new connections between museum and the audiences and communities it serves. I won't go into too much detail about kind of the processes of what I've done, just kind of a brief kind of overview. I am actually talking later today, so if you're interested, please catch me at 4 p.m. But yeah, basically the project that we did consists of co-creating an online exhibition called Crypto Connections, which you can see here. And yeah, the link will obviously kind of take you to this exhibition on the website. And we basically invited a group of participants to bring along two types of objects, or choose two types of objects at the workshop. One is a personal possession that they own, that they have a meaningful relationship to. And then we ask them to go out into the museum and choose a museum object, again, based on this idea of personal relationships. And yeah, this then forms this online exhibition. So if you click on any of these images, you'll see that basically they have the image of the object with a summary from the participant about why they chose the object and what their personal relationship is to it. And we did this to try and basically create personal NFTs. So we then developed a decentralized gallery, which allows us to basically mint NFTs. And we basically took all the information from the online exhibition and turned them into tokens. And each participant basically owns a token of their chosen objects. So one of their personal possession and one of the museum objects. And in doing so, we're basically permanently connecting their personal experience or narrative about the object to the image itself, and creating what we might see as essentially a kind of personal edition. So yeah, the underlying argument really to my research is looking at how we can make personal editions of the digital collection and how we might be able to use that to forge new connections. So I'm really interested in looking at NFTs essentially beyond the monetary value, and thinking about how we can use digital tokens to basically create digital possessions, and all kind of things which essentially are embedded with personal meaning and value. And in terms of my thesis, I'm looking at this through kind of three lenses, and that's ownership, authority, and authenticity. And I say these because I think this could be quite a useful kind of bounding point for questions for our panel. So in terms of my research, I look at this idea around shared guardianship. So essentially, is this new connection that we've created the potential to be a sense of stewardship or guardianship, where both the museum and the participant has this sense of ownership over the token, and how could that basically create an ongoing relationship? But then also this kind of then leads to the question of what is it when we really own a museum object NFT? Like, what do we actually have? What do we have control over? And what does the museum actually retain? Which also then kind of leads to this question of, you know, what exactly is digital property? What is this digital thingness? And then in terms of authority, it's about this idea of kind of how might NFTs be used within collaborative practices of cultural institutions. So obviously my research is very much this kind of co-productive idea. Does the NFT then act as a way to remunerate participants for their investment into the project? Or does there need to be something more? And finally, this idea of authenticity, because of course, blockchain attempts to be a certificate of authenticity in the digital domain. So if blockchain adds an element of authenticity, we also need to think about, does it add to other forms of authenticity? Because of course, the term is multidimensional, and it's, you know, quite a complex term. So does basically blockchain add anything to ideas around aura or constructivist understandings of this term? And ultimately, are there other factors involved in this as well? So such as institutional authority, which actually perhaps more of an integral role in kind of making NFTs feel legitimate. And I put in brackets there just this idea of the Global Arts Museum social experiment that happened earlier this year, which again, I'm happy to kind of expand on a little bit more in our discussion. But basically, I'm really interested in looking at NFTs through the lens of museum practices. And while there are kind of obviously a lot of opportunities and of course a lot of risks of using NFTs, I also think there's a lot to learn from NFTs and the technology itself as a decentralizing technology, and how we could actually just use it as a way to critically reflect on our cultural institutions. So yeah, in other words, I think there's more to the NFT than meets the eye. Yeah, I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Francis. That was a brilliant summary and some great questions. And I think it ties in very nicely what Ilian's going to talk about now with Uncopied. So over to you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Francis. And Uncopied. So I'm Ilian Cassana and I founded Uncopied.art. Uncopied is a new service to create certificates of authenticity, proof of provenance, both for physical and digital artworks. Now, to bridge the physical to digital gap, we use a technology from the Middle Age called the chirograph. So this is an example of chirograph from the 13th century. It's simply a contract that is written 3 times on the same sheet of paper. And then it's cut along the lines with some random patterns. And it works a little bit like a mathematical one-way function. It's easy to cut this sheet of paper in 3 parts. It would be hard to make it whole again. And each contracting party goes with his contract, and the third part remains with a churchman at the time, or a judge, or a trusted third party. So I'll share a quick presentation now to show how this can relate to the world of art today. The chirograph that we create with Uncopied is very similar to the 13th century version, except it has 5 parts to support a very decentralized process. The part in the middle would typically be glued to the back of a limited edition print or a painting, or in a museum, it might be attached to the object using a little cord. And of course, instead of having the whole contract, what we have here is a QR code that links to a lot of information. For example, images, metadata, and other information. Now, we might think that in today's world, it's easy to create unicity, but anything can be copied or faked, including NFTs. An NFT can be copied because you can create 2 NFTs from the same source digital object. So we reuse, in fact, the physical property of uniqueness of a chirograph to attach it to a digital object that is supposed to be unique. Now, in addition to that, the idea is also to have a plain English physical document attached to this object, explaining the authenticity, but also clarifying aspects of intellectual property, ownership, and so on. We want also to make connection with the way museums today have metadata to describe artworks. For example, linked.art or schema.org, which describes different types of visual or artworks. Another challenge is the aspects of the long-term conservation. How can we ensure objects, digital objects, are still there in 100 years, 1,000 years? Now, one also challenge of NFTs is how you ensure their unicity when they can actually be copied onto, for example, Instagram many times and so on. So this solution there is something like reverse image search, where you can go a little bit like the Interpol is doing for recovering stolen artworks. You go from the image to find the actual object. Last and least, we wanted to use a very carbon-friendly blockchain technology. In yesterday's or Monday's session, there was a lot of challenging about how NFTs consume a lot of energy. It's not a necessity today. There are new blockchains that are extremely efficient, like Algorand or Tezos. So this is how the chirograph can be made in a very small scale or in a larger scale for a museum, for example, to secure museum conservation. The algorithms that detect object similarity are used also by, for example, Interpol for recovering stolen objects, but they are also used typically by Google reverse search engines, TinEye, and we've integrated that technology. One also interesting aspect is we wanted to provide these capabilities as a very decentralized system where we can integrate with, very specific projects of a particular museum or another art tech company. So the software works as a set of API and standards that we decided to reuse, coming from already consortium of museums, coming from a technological consortium like the Art Identification Consortium, or for example, the ICOS Consortium of Museum. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with Frances and Gustaf.
Thank you so much, Eliane. That's fantastic. So yeah, I guess the first thing is just a sort of an overview then of what I'm hearing from all of you. So quick summary, Gustaf seems to be working on high-end editions of museum collections. Frances seems to be working on personal editions, making a personal edition of a digital collection. And Eliane, you seem to be looking at proof of provenance. How do we actually create these digital certificates? And I love the fact that you're bringing the ancient and the modern together with your chirographs. So I guess my first question to each of you is a very simple one: is how do you see yourselves working together? If you were to work together as a unit, like the three of you, how could you cross-pollinate your work? And if you could all answer just one by one, that would be great. Maybe you with Gustaf, if you could start.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think we're all in the same intersection of arts and technology, and more specifically the cultural or museum sector and technology. So this is an area where we could collaborate. So yeah, what we are doing is basically not so much of a difference than what Frances is already also researching, right? So how can museums become more accessible, or how can you democratize ownership of museum collections, right? How can you make these collections as available to the public as possible? So I think this is that's very interesting, and that is what we are trying to do with the Artifund platform as well. So and with Eliane, I mean, it's a great addition too, where you can have all these proofs of security and of authenticity. That's, I think, with the art market or with the cultural sector and with respectable institutions, authenticity and authority are very and trust are very, very important. So I think all these all these things matter in a great way.
Thanks, Gustaf. Frances, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of to echo Gustaf as well, like it's just come from the same focus, which is ultimately we want to support the sector and try and address questions that they are already trying to answer, and just looking at, can essentially the NFT be a way to address these problems? I think also with terms of just my research, I've tried to develop something that is potentially quite translatable into lots of different projects, because it's essentially about this idea of using the metadata stored within an NFT to make it more valuable. And I think that's something that could work both with Eliane's work with Uncopied, Gustaf's work as well. So yeah, I think there's definitely kind of a point of collaboration for sure. And I think it was also, the more I've spoken with people looking at NFTs in museums, I think we're all batting for the same side, and there's no real kind of, I don't know, I'd argue that there's not much competition, because we're all just trying to work out together whether this is actually a viable option, and whether this has kind of real opportunities, or do the risks outweigh the opportunities.
Thanks, Frances. Eliane, did you want to add something?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very grateful for you, Carl, for bringing us together. One initial pilot project for Uncopied is with the National Museum of Mali. Now, this particular museum has been hit not only by the COVID being closed down, but also several years of terrorism and having hardly any tourists in the country, a coup d'etat, even last month. So such museums have a very strong current time, and even if now life is going back to normal, many such museums actually will be at risk in terms of conservation of their collections, especially the reserve collections. So our initial idea, and that goes with what Gustaf is doing and Francis as well, was, okay, what we could do is we could issue NFTs, you know, pictures of the artworks that we would sell as NFTs. And the money from that would be used to preserve the collections by creating certificates of, not certificates of authenticity, but certificates of inventory, which prove that the museum at this date has this object, and should it be stolen, it will make it easier to recover it from Interpol and from the police and border guards and so on. And the other benefit is also you can put in the metadata of the conservation object. The conservation of this object was made possible because, you know, those 20 people have purchased a limited edition copy of the object, virtual copy, but contributed for the conservation of the object. And at the same time, it helps create also a sense of ownership between the people who can be in Mali, but who could be in Europe as well. A sense of collective ownership for these objects, which also could be a way to go beyond who actually own the object in terms of a museum, for example, because it's also a very big challenge to say, okay, who owns this piece as a museum? When actually we would like also these objects to travel and to be seen both in Africa, in Europe, in the US, in different parts of the world. So I'm really excited personally to keep the connection both with Gustaf and Francis and how we can make this work. We've just made a first, you know, certificate of authenticity for a virtual artwork last week for an exhibition called Epoch Freeport by Peter Wu. But we're now looking at how we can work actually on real objects from museums, and we're looking forward to make progress on that.
Thank you, Elian. So the question I have actually for you, Elian, first would be one around what we've been doing at Starts in Motion. So we've both been selected for the Starts in Motion program. And effectively, I'm looking to see how do you create an NFT of a unique performance. So we've obviously seen a lot of work going into art, music, literature. I've got a friend that's just actually creating NFTs of her VR experience. But one of the issues with that particular artist is that she's created something quite unique. She's working with cymatics and capturing cymatics in artwork, so and then printing it onto glass and to wood. But she's quite, you know, she's very hesitant about releasing that technique because she wants to preserve it. She wants to have IPR on it. So we talked a little bit about this idea that at the moment, the average NFT is a pointer to the artwork. It's not the actual artwork itself. It's just a reference. And we also know that a lot of art on the web just comes and goes. It disappears. And I know Graham on the call is very much about the physical object. And I'm a big art collector myself. And I have a large collection of physical artifacts. And I haven't got into crypto because I think, well, you know, it's a little bit, you know, hit and miss, and it's also, we talked about the environmental costs, and I'd rather just see my asset, you know, I'd rather just look at the asset. So, but going back to that point about capturing a performance or capturing something that you want to copyright, obviously we have copyright laws already, but do you think the NFT, and I know that you're interested in what we've been talking about, is actually getting the actual artwork as the NFT, not just a pointer, but the artwork itself becoming the NFT. And you're very interested in long-term storage of that artwork, and obviously the costs increase. So for instance, if I'm creating a 3D point cloud of a performance rather than just a video, That's in the gigabytes. So the question I have for you is, can NFTs help with preservation of IP? And talk a little bit through about how Uncopied helps with preservation of the actual artwork.
Yes. So in the case that you describe, there's two aspects. One is there is the data file that records the artwork, and it can be a very large data file. And this is what should be preserved. IPFS means the Interplanetary File System, is a quite new format that provides the capability to store files in a distributed database that is not exactly a blockchain, but that is more like a cluster of computers, and provide redundancy in terms of storage. So for Uncopied, for example, what we do is every digital object we certify is stored on by two different providers, which is Pinata and Uncopied. And for the Uncopied part, will be stored on at least 3 computers. So it's like at minimum 4 copies of the digital object. Now, for large files, of course, it has a cost to preserve them for the next 10 years or 100 years. So what we want to make is at least the promise when you have a 10-year certificate that the data is preserved for 10 years. And we want to have a sustainable model to go beyond that, maybe through collaboration with public organisms whose role is to ensure this long-term preservation, like British Library in the UK, Library of Congress in the US, or Bibliothèque Nationale in France. Now, secondly, there's the aspect of intellectual property. There, we've designed a system to be extremely flexible to accommodate legal document templates from lawyers. So the exhibition, for example, of Peter Wu was secured by a 3-page contract, legal document called a collector agreement that was designed by Sarah, and that is attached on the blockchain along with the NFT. Third, you need metadata to describe the artwork in a way that is better than what is currently done by NFTs. Now, NFTs currently are just described by a name, maybe description, a few properties, whereas artwork in a museum have a wealth of information. And that information depends if it's a statue, if it's a painting, if it's so for the case of your performance recording, you should see what kind of existing metadata can be used, and perhaps also expand and extend those metadata schema so that it fits actually your particular subject. And last, there's the question for copyright, enforcing copyright. There's the question of how you can recognize similar artworks. And at this stage, what we use is for images, we use image recognition, but of course that needs to be expanded for films or for 3D. And in your case, you know, it does require to enhance the system so it can recognize similar performances. So this is probably the part that would be most complex and most custom.
Thank you so much. That's great, Elian. Over to you, Francis. I'd love to hear more about your Global Art Museum experiment that you were mentioning. So if you can give us a little bit of an update and a preview for your talk later today, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is just something that I followed on Twitter back in March, and I would say it probably was one of the other points that really set off NFT interest in kind of arts and culture. And essentially it was a group of artists under the name of kind of Global Arts Museum, and they took works from museums with open access policies, so the Rijksmuseum, Birmingham, I believe it was the Chicago Institute as well, and pretended to mint them on OpenSea, which is basically a kind of blockchain exchange, so anyone can sell NFTs on it. And their argument was basically, because they're open access, they had every right to do it, because you can, with open access policies, you can commercially remake and use images from digital collections without even having to ask permission from the museum. And of course, this set off a massive emotional response on Twitter. I would recommend looking into it. And I wrote actually a piece on the Cultural Practices magazine as well as a little summary, so you can find the Twitter link there as well. But yeah, obviously it was all a social experiment, and people were, again, quite outraged and didn't even believe them that it was a social experiment. They thought they were just backtracking. But yeah, it's essentially, it brought into this kind of ethical dilemma of kind of open access policies are relinquishing control, and NFTs now give people the ability to commoditize digital content. So where does this leave museums? Should this mean that they need to, in a way, mint their own NFTs before anyone else does? Or perhaps does this just mean that we need to think more carefully about what we let go of? Or perhaps should museums just accept that this is giving away control? So yeah, it was a really interesting experiment.
Fantastic. So Francis is talking again at 4 o'clock in Graham's research workshop, and that's always a great session. So do join then. It's the same Zoom link as this one. Gustaf, just on you, and just to mention to everyone else, if you have any questions for our 3 panelists, please start putting them in the chat. We're going to go slightly over because we started slightly late. So Terry, if you're about to ask a question, just put it in the chat, and then I'll open the floor in a little while. But Gustaf, I'd just love to hear a little bit about your particular area of interest in this area. So what are the really complicated things that you do? I mean, what are the complications of working with museums and creating high-end editions of this kind of work?
Well, thanks, Carl, for this question. I think, well, I'm coming from the art market. I was an art dealer for the last until 2019. So I've spent my share of time in dealing artworks of young contemporary artists, basically upcoming artists. But also I had a lot of contact with and communication with institutions, with museums, and with artists and with collectors, of course. But we found now that the museums, they have been doing things in a certain way for decennia, if not ages, right? So it's very difficult for them to think about something new, or not necessarily something new, but it's a quite conservative approach of showing art. And I mean, that's in a way a good thing. And more museums are seeing the necessity, also because of COVID and of the pandemic, that they can attract less visitors, that they should digitize their collections in order to have the most people can view these collections. But what they find difficult is to monetize these collections. So what they can do in an offline situation, where you can charge a ticket for an entrance to see the collection, or you can enter their museum shop. It's a different situation when you put all your like Francis was already describing, all your artworks online for free. So what we are doing is helping museums. So what we very much applaud having all these collections digitized online, right? Like the Rijksmuseum, they almost finished their 1 million pieces online accessible for free, and I think that's a very good thing. But next to that, and apart from that, there's also a possibility for them to offer, well, you can call them digital collectibles, or you can call them digital artworks, or at least things based on that collections, like they're doing in their web shop basically as well. So create interesting content, create interesting collectibles that you can offer to a public, to potentially new group of art patrons. So yeah, I think that's what we found very difficult for people who have never been who never had thought about these quite could be intimidating concepts of blockchain, of NFTs, of digital ownership, of shared ownership, maybe even of collections. To all of a sudden have to think about it when you are, well, trying to keep your museum afloat, trying to keep your staff aboard, which was already at many museums not necessarily technologically staffed or well staffed. So these are for museums and for the personnel and for directors and for curators, conservators. It takes a bit of time. So that's what we are experiencing at the moment. And we have a long breath and we have a deep understanding of this process, and that it takes time to land. And that's why we are now, like I said before, we've been having talks with museums since 2019 to explore the possible use cases of these non-fungible tokens and blockchain and what it could mean for the museums. So now, and the news is definitely helping, or not always, but the media around it is helping people understand what is happening and what the possibilities are for a museum. So not only financial benefits, right? So not only additional income streams, but also in terms of better engagement models with a new audience from a distance.
Thank you so much, Gustaf. So we've got about 4 minutes left for questions. Hope you're going to be okay with that, Graham. Terry, did you have a question?
Carl, no, I didn't. I was just, after you finished, I was just going to talk about the preparations for this afternoon.
All right.
I haven't got a question.
All right, I've got a final question for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's a simple one. Thanks for that, Terry. It's a simple one. What is the best, most innovative or inventive instance of an NFT that you've currently seen? And I'm going to get Elian to answer that one first. You're muted, Elian.
Well, you know, Peter Wu was in our Starts in Motion session, and and when he told us what he wanted to do as an NFT, I thought that we have to get out of the NFT market with Uncopied. So we left him a bit on his own to actually finish what he wanted to do with the NFT, and we just focused on the certification for the object. And he was a little bit on his own to actually create the NFT with a freelancer from Nigeria, Jesulonimi, who basically wrote a smart contract that split the sales of the virtual artwork between the gallery and 7 artists. And then for secondary resales, the 20% royalties between the 8 participants. I found this so innovative that I thought it wouldn't work, but it did work, and it was done, and it's live, and it was sold actually on the 2nd of July for the first time. So I can't say that I don't know. I know very much about the other innovative cases of NFT, but I did find this one actually quite innovative.
Thank you, Elian. That's great. Francis, over to you.
That's a difficult one. I think an artwork that I really love, an NFT, it's on Async Art by Micah Johnson, and it basically depicts 2 young boys looking through a door, and on the other side is a man in a sort of spaceship suit, basically. And it's about, but what the artist has done, and what the interesting part is that he's embedded a smart contract into the NFT itself. So on the days of the boys' birthdays, because it represents 2 real boys, a Bitcoin wallet appears and you can donate. And it's about this idea of investing into our future and giving boys from, and girls across the world this opportunity to live out their dreams, no matter where they live. And I just thought it was just a really great way of kind of engaging in, a different way of using digital wallets, and of course using digital currencies as well.
Thank you, Francis. Okay, Gustaf, final word for you.
I really like to echo Francis on that one. The projects that are going live on async art, the programmable art place or marketplace, they are very interesting. But what I think it's nice to point out, NFTs not necessarily mean art, right? So the token part is the interesting part of an NFT, and this token can represent a variety of things. And if you see it more as you could see it more as a key that unlocks content in the real world, but also in the digital or in the virtual world. And I think that's where the enormous potential lies as well for tokens. So the idea that you buy a collectible or an artwork or a concert tickets, or that you can create new subscription models based on your token or your collectible or your artwork. I mean, those I think things are very, very fascinating, I think, to follow.
Right, Gustaf, thank you so much. We're right on time. So Graham, over to you. Actually, Terry, you wanted to say about the upcoming session, so I'll let you do that.